Thanks for tuning in to the third episode of No Destination. As you can tell, we've made some improvements, and by we, I mean my pride, myself, and I saw the first two videos, and there's a lot of room for improvement from a lighting standpoint, figuring out how the heck a camera works. It is a work in progress, and I appreciate you bearing with me. I'll continue to fine tune these things. I've never done this before, so I'm figuring out as I go along. And in years past, I would have spent weeks, months thinking about it, saying, I'll look into it, I'll get back to it. Yeah, I really don't know how to do this. But in the spirit of just having these conversations, I'm holding myself to it. And so here I am again, figuring it out on the fly. We are building the airplane as it's taking off. So I don't know where we're going yet. If you know, let me know. So the third episode is about the song Pulaski. So as a creative person, I think every project or effort or maybe even new hobby, there's like this moment that you have where this is where it started. This is where you got into it. This is a thing that inspired what came after it. And that is very true for Pulaski. Pulaski was the first song that I wrote for Late Bloomer in a Wallflower Suit that was, this is something different. And it inspired me in a different kind of way. And every record has kind of had that feeling for me. With Brilliant Mistakes, it was definitely the stories we tell. There was the mixture of older songs and new songs. And the stories we tell was a song that Cris had never heard before. And we were just testing out the audio interface and seeing if we could get good levels and some decent sounds. And he had never heard the song before. And he just kind of hung on for the ride. And what you hear on like the third or fourth take is like the third or fourth time Cris had ever tried the song, and it worked really well. But that gave us confidence to keep going, and we were really excited about it. Outsiders had this opportunity to have a long period of time for me to collect a lot of different creative ideas, and even going a step backwards. Brilliant Mistakes used to be called Dark Horses, and Dark Horses was a project that Cris McAvoy and I had envisioned that would be our music. We'd met at a music studio. We had met working on other people's songs that other people cared a lot about. And we had first connected over the record Music for a Rainy Day by the Jayhawks. And I don't know about you, but I think everybody has a record that defines like a year, a period, a grade, a summer, a vacation. And Music for a Rainy Day was one of those albums along the timeline that just, I love it. I love the songs. I love the production. I love everything about it. And Cris also loved it. And we were both playing the hell out of that CD in our own car. And so when we took a break at the studio, which, by the way, hilariously, the session that we were working on, Cris plays drums, by the way. I don't know why I did this, just in case you are watching. You have the visual of what a drummer may do. This is also air traffic controller, not to be confused. But we were on break because we were trying to get this song, the takedown, and move on. And the artist that we were working with, this was in the very like early part of Pro Tools, had come in with all these really, I would say, somewhat sophisticated demos where they were really belabored demos where everything was quantized, and he had spent all this time sequencing all this stuff. Like now you would just mix that, but what he was trying to do is he spent all this time, effort, energy on these great, these demos that he thought were really great, and then he wanted musicians to breathe life into it, which is a great idea. And Cris was playing exactly how the loop quantized thing was going down, and the artist was getting frustrated because having a real drummer play that loop didn't sound as good. There's certain like insert, whatever kind of dance groove or beat loop thing. Sometimes it just sounds better. Like the loop sounds better than what a drummer could do. Not because the drummer's not great, but that just is the way it is. So the guy was like, well, let me try to play drums. And as a guitar player myself, I hope at any rehearsal that I'm at, the drummer will, step out make a phone call, go to use the restroom, go get something to drink, because that means the drum kit is open for season, and that means maybe I can play drums. And I play as much as I can, and then the drummer usually comes back in abruptly because I'm playing the drum set. But anyways, so we didn't know like how long this was going to be. Like this guy got behind the kit. We're like, maybe he's great at drums, and maybe that's why the programmed drums sound great or whatever. The loop sounds good because he knows what he's doing. It was clear, like one take in, that like I don't think this guy had ever played drums before. And since he had kind of made a big stink about he's going to try, he was digging his heels in to like keep going, like take after take. So after a couple takes, the engineer told Cris and I to go take a break, which was great because sometimes you get inside the glass bubble and stuff starts adding up and the pressure mounts, and sometimes it's easier just to like kind of like let the room disperse. And they were able to have some conversation. But what that allowed is it allowed for Cris and I to go chat. It was the first time that we'd actually talked for a really long time. And Music for Rainy Day, that Jayhawks record, we immediately connected over that because we'd both been playing the hell out of that record. And we went like, that's the kind of music. Like we want to make a record like that. We want to make a record that not only that like is our stuff, but like just from every aspect of Music for Rainy Day. It sounds good. The songs are good. The vocals are great. The mix is awesome. So we connected over that. And, you know, Cris was in a bunch of bands. I was in several bands. And a couple years had gone by, but we had finally gotten a window where we could work on our own project. And we called that Dark Horses. And so Dark Horses was really that love of the same type of music. Other bands we were really into were like Jellyfish. Cris actually got me into Jellyfish, and Jellyfish is amazing. So we had this love of records, and we just want to make records because that's what we did for other people. We want to do it for ourselves. And so that's what Dark Horses started out as, and we had a ton of songs. And we played some shows, some really, really good shows. And then life happened. Cris went through a divorce. I went through a divorce. My dad passed away. We talked about that episode too. And don't worry, not all the episodes are going to be super heavy, you know, but some of them just require us to go a little bit deeper. Anyway, so Dark Horses hit that moment where life took precedent. There was some real stuff that had to be worked on. And that was also the period where I had to go be a dad. I had to go be a person. I had to have some life experiences outside of music and just kind of figure out what was going on because so much was happening at one time personally. And when Cris and I remained friends, we talked. There was always like, we should go back to those songs. We should finish that because we never made a record. We never recorded them, even though we had played some shows and we had done a lot of little demos. We had never made a proper record of those songs, and there was a bunch. Fast forward, I've been playing guitar again. I'd been writing the whole time, but an artist that we had both played with before needed a guitar player for a little bit, so I stepped in. I could play guitar. You know, I'll try. And so this was my second trip in that group, and I was playing guitar, and Cris was playing drums, and we had gotten the audio interface to be able to record that project because the idea was that we would be kind of a backing band for songwriters and help them with their demo or their EP, you know, just smaller projects. But the idea is that we would work up and learn it as we were going along. Got the audio interface. She actually got in a bike accident. Like she's okay, but like she had some like a wrist injury or something, so she couldn't play guitar for a while and needed to take a break and all that stuff. So we were testing out the audio interface, and I just written the song called "The Stories We Tell." And you know, within a couple takes, it was there. The take, it was it. We both felt it. It was like, this is great. That signaled a big creative period and really propelled Brilliant Mistakes, which then became Late Bloomer. But The Stories We Tell was definitely that song for that project that inspired not only a way to kind of revitalize some of the older songs that we loved, but to bring some newer material that would maybe broaden the sound or maybe kind of bring it into scope, if that makes sense. So recording Outsiders, we had talked about, it was a pretty easy process recording Outsiders. Truthfully, the mixing was the truly terrible part of that project because we mixed that record 3 times. And if we're being honest, the mix that is out there is not great. One day we will go back and we will remix that record. I don't know why that record is so impossible to mix. Maybe it's because I helped engineer it. I don't know. I was never a great engineer, but anyway, uh, mixing that record was the real difficult part of that journey. So finishing that period, there's that moment, at least for me, I can't speak for anybody else, where it's just like, am I gonna ever write another song again? Like seriously, like that is a real thought. Like, am I ever gonna be able to do this again? And I've heard other songwriters talk about this, and I think it's just important to say out loud. But even some of your favorite bands, your favorite singer-songwriters, I've heard them express a similar desire, and I'm nowhere near the level of ability or success that some of those other songwriters have had. But there is kind of like this oh crap moment where it's like, well, now what do I do? Because the canvas is blank. And I find it easier to start trying to bring in maybe some of the songs that didn't make it or weren't as finished or maybe didn't fit in later once you have some stuff already going. That's just my opinion. You could do it any way you want to. But after Outsiders, since we had all those old songs and I was super inspired to keep writing and get as much in consideration for the record new song wise, I really wanted to like turn the page and challenge myself. And, I wanted to, the sound we were hoping was a little bit different. And so there's that moment where I was like, well, we're starting over. Like, we have no songs now. And the first song that I wrote for that would become Late Bloomer in a Wallflower Suit was Pulaski. That was the song where I knew that I was working on a new batch of songs, where this felt like a new moment, a new thought, a new feeling. It didn't feel connected, but in a way was like a way back into that world, but a way out. And for me, I consider myself fortunate. I try to show up and write as much as I can, and I don't struggle as much with ideas or fleshing things out. It's really the editing process that I'm not great at. I have no problem writing. It's really the reining reining the Dylan in, so to speak. But that first draft of Pulaski was a very different song. So the chorus that's on the record and the chorus that's on that first draft, and this was like almost a stream of conscious type of thing where it's like just all one draft with almost no cross outs. I have an iPhone demo of it I may put up at some point, but it's a very personal actual draft. I have this core childhood memory of my Nana Jane taking me to Fort Pulaski several times because she had like an annual pass. And I used to love to go to old battlefields and old forts. That stuff was just really fascinating to me. And you're probably seeing now that I've always been like this 40-year-old man, even as a child. That's just the way it was. But we had a very large family, and like a lot of Southern families, like everybody's a cousin. Doesn't matter. We don't really recognize something removed or twice removed or first adjacent. Everyone's just a cousin. And so Nana Jane was my grandfather's sister and just one of my favorite people in my life ever. And I feel so fortunate not only to be, related to her, but just to have been able to be in the presence of her humanity and her humor. And, I feel so fortunate to have the people that I've had in my life. And she was a very positive light. And so these trips to Fort Pulaski were not far from where she lived. But there were these like little trips where it was just her and I. And, I would never have cared if anybody came, but it was also like undivided attention as well. So that part was nice. But I wrote it. The chorus is the way it is on the record, and the chorus it felt very disjointed like right away because the chorus is kind of like really big and universal, and the verses are very like specific and personal, and that can definitely work. But I wanted to I wanted to remove some of myself from the verses because it just felt too much like a journal entry. Like it rhymed. I guess that counts for something, but I just kind of wanted to obscure it a little bit. So I sat with it for a day or two and went to go write some more verses. And that next time I went to do that, I mean, it came out like on like one thing, and that's pretty much the way that second revision went. I wrote all new verses for the songs and a new bridge, and then the chorus is unchanged. But the reason why it's called Pulaski is because it was about a trip that I would take with Nana Jane to Fort Pulaski. And Pulaski just sounded easier than Fort Pulaski, even though I never sing it in either version. But that's how that song came to be. And so that ushered in a new period where I wrote something, it felt good, it felt like I when it's going well, it's almost like this you're just kind of like letting it happen and you're not really like forcing it, if that makes sense for me. And it kind of just happened. And that was the first one of these songs. Like it was the first one that I wrote for this new bat, and it signaled something else, a new thing that was completely different. And then leaving Brilliant Mistakes and making the decision to go to Athens to record with Andy Lemaster, it was hearing it back on the playback for the first time in the control room, the way that the chorus just opened up. It was just like one of those moments. Like we knew like we were onto something. Like this was real good stuff. And that was the second kind of aha moment for, this period. The first being, writing Pulaski, but then the second actually going to the studio and having that affirmation of, wow, this sounds exactly the way I wanted it to, if not better in my mind. And that's a really fragile thing. If you again, just to share my own experience, if we'd gone back and for Brilliant Mistakes and the first demo that we tried, the interface, it was hard to use. It didn't sound right. We didn't get the levels. The software was weird. I don't know what would have come next. The fact that it came easy and it sounded good is what really propelled us to keep going. And it was a big leap to go to the studio. It was a leap of faith. And the fact that there was like this immediate like, this is it. This is why we made this decision. This was the right decision. It inspired the rest of the record, and it let me know that I was on the right track to keep pushing in that direction. And Pulaski was that first song in the studio that was a part of the first session, and it was just like, hey, I think we're onto something. That's Pulaski, and I'm curious. What is that moment for you? Is it whether it's picking up a new hobby like photography or I don't know, underwater basket weaving? Was there that moment for you that made you get into something? Maybe flip fishing? Did you go with somebody that knew what they were doing and you caught something right away and that made you super invested in that? Or maybe even something creative. I do think what's been really impactful for me, having a period where I just really focused in on personal stuff and then to come back to music a couple of years later. My hope is that whether it's a hobby or it's a creative pursuit, that everybody has that opportunity to build something, to, get better at something. And I think the thing I feel fortunate about being a creative person is the ability to move through the world as an artist and to see it that way. Because naturally, creative people are trying to build things, are trying to shed light or give perspective or contextualize. I just, to give hope. And I think that's a powerful thing. And I feel very fortunate that along the way with this record, I had already done the thing with Brilliant Mistakes. I came back, I put out a record that I was really proud of. It meant something to me. And there wasn't a reason to put out another one. Newsflash. Most people don't care about records as much as I do anymore. So it's an act of defiance, I think, to do that. Whether you're planting the garden on the weekends or you get into painting or photography, it's your thing. It's your thing that you get to cultivate and have perspective and make that's your own. And uh, I changed a lot making this record. And I think that's what I've started to discover trying to find a way to talk about the record is that this record changed me and the way that I viewed myself, saying that my hope is that everybody can find that thing, right? That it's never too late to be whatever it is that you want to be because it's your life. But to be able to be a person that does things that change your world for the positive. There's a lot of stuff that we consume that isn't positive, even if you agree with it. And so, the great thing about being creative is you have the choice to do with that what you may, and you get to turn that into something that's never existed before. And how this record ultimately changed me is it reminded me of why I started. So, when I started playing music, I was very upfront. I didn't give a shit about being famous. Like that looks terrible. Let's be let's be honest. I mean, with the exception of maybe like one or two people that you have followed on whatever social media, and that's just like a bizarre world anyway. I mean, like, does anybody that's famous like look like they're having fun? I mean, I don't know. I just always think of those like this Ben Affleck like pictures where he's like letting Jennifer Lopez into the car and he's like exhaling and like looking up and like he knows he's being photographed. Like it just all looks crazy, right? So that was never the dream. The dream was never to be famous. The dream was to be creative. The dream was to figure myself out. That's why I got started because Dylan, who was super awkward and liked to go to Civil War forts and revolutionary battlefields, loved records. And that was baseball, history, and records were the three things that I loved as a kid. And they made me feel like I had a world, like that was mine. And, I could put a CD on back in the day and be transported somewhere else. And somebody could say something that made me feel like they got it and they got me. And that was important. So records were a huge deal to me. And I really didn't care about a lot of other things, which is a terrible work ethic as far as there weren't a ton of goals associated with like, oh, I want to sell 1 million records. That was never it. It was just to be a creative person and to make interesting music that was good, that connected with people and that was honest. And that was the goal. And I'm really proud of, I have a giant Tupperware tote, like one of the big ones that you put like linens or Christmas lights in an attic. It is filled with 4-track recordings of songs that go back to elementary school, middle school. Like there's albums that I wrote in middle school that are on these 4 tracks that will never see the light of day because I do have pride. But that's why I started. I started because I loved records and they made me feel like I could understand the world through this. And where I'm going is that I had gotten to a point where I got to do some really cool stuff. I got to open up for some really interesting bands. I got to play some interesting venues. I got to play with some great people. I got to play on records. I got to work at a studio. And when my son was on the way, I had kind of this reckoning of like, oh, I definitely need to be able to provide and figure that out. And there was this conflict since it was never about money or whatever that meant being famous or being on tour. And going back to last episode, being the person who my dad wasn't, I was almost wired to be the person my dad wasn't because of my growing up experience having the dad that I had. I did not want to have that for Miles, my son. I just didn't. I didn't want to have to go through that. And I made a conscious effort to do less and less music. And when I was at my dad's funeral, we talked about some of that stuff. One of the things, though, sitting in that church on that August afternoon that I knew is my son would never wonder what his dad thought or if he cared about him, or if he was proud of him, or if he loved him. And the profound sense of just like, not ease, because that's the wrong way to put that, but it was like, yeah, it is going to be different for my kid than it was for me. And that's great. So when all that happened, dad, dark horses, the divorce, I made an effort to be the opposite of my dad and to be a very present dad as a single dad. Like I just that was the choice. And I'd never done music for fun. It was always like this creative thing where I was very focused and working on the next project. And there was no manual of like how to handle being a creative person with also being a like responsible person. I don't know. It just didn't. I didn't know that those things could coexist. And so I had an unhealthy relationship with myself with it because it's definitely not my son's fault that I stopped doing music. I made those decisions so I could like whatever and in my mind be a different kind of person. And I'd run into someone, oh gosh, a couple years later after Dark Horse had ended, and I had done some acoustic shows, which funnily enough, one of the last acoustic shows I did, I was on a bill with Greg Shaddix, and I sent him that screenshot, and we both don't remember it. I don't remember Greg. Greg doesn't remember me, but we actually played on the same bill in a town we both didn't live in the Atlanta area, but at Eddie's new place. But small world. It's funny how those paths collided at some point unknowingly. Anyway, I digress, as you see several times here. But I told you, late bloomer. I learned a lot about myself making this record, and this record really opened my eyes. And it helped me more than it'll probably help other people. Because We're Outsiders was just about fulfilling that creative thing that was never finalized, or never finished, or never approached from a partnership, a band standpoint. Now we're just making stuff to not go quietly into that good night. And when I had run into that person who hadn't seen me in a couple years, they said, "Hey, when are you playing out next?" I was like, "Oh, I don't play music anymore." And they're like, "Really? That seems really weird because that's all we ever knew you as, is the guy who played music." I was like, "Yeah, I get it. I get it." And they asked a question about my son, about if he'd ever seen me play, or something to that effect, like out or whatever. And I was like, "No." And they're like, "Oh, wow. That's weird." And it stuck with me because they were right. It was weird. Like, why did I let this thing like go? Why was it so compartmentalized in my head? And it all goes back to like, me wanting to be the opposite of my dad. And on the High and Lonesome episode, the previous one, we talked about that. Like, if I had a better relationship with, well, not relationship, but if I had better perspective about what I had time for and what was reasonable from a creative standpoint, and still being a great dad. There's plenty of creative people who are amazing parents or spouses or partners. That is totally doable. But this record is that affirmation that I created this for me, to prove that I'm not going quietly into that good night. Because the reason that I started a really long time ago was just to figure myself out. I'm still figuring myself out, as you can tell on these episodes. And I don't know if any song encapsulates that feeling better than Pulaski. The chorus. It all works out in its own time, and dark days, they don't last that long. And there's a real message of hope there. And I felt hopeful making this record, even talking about some of the darker stuff. Like, you, you know, we create in spite of the sadness and the misery and the trauma and the whatever, and we can contextualize it. We can let it sit next to us, and we can have that conversation and bring somebody into it in a musical way. But I just felt like I found myself making this record, and I felt more like myself on this record because I was allowing myself to move through my world the way that is most natural to me. And that's as an artist, as a creative person. And yes, I have a day job. Yes, I'm a husband. Yes, I'm a dad, but I'm also that guy that likes to write songs to make sense of his own world. And Pulaski's about that. And in a really cool way, Nana Jane inspired all that. And it was a way in to that. And it's a great core memory, but it's also still helping me today as a person that's older than that now. And so my question to you is, what is that way into a project for you? What was that aha moment for you? What was that thing that made you feel like you were, maybe capable of moving to a new city or capable of starting a new hobby or a new career or a creative pursuit? I think all those things are valid and like similar. And I'm still figuring it out myself. And I'm just glad you're a part of the conversation and listening to me unpack it. So this has been episode 3 of No Destination. If you liked it, feel free to, give us a review. I say us. It's just if you're listening this long, you're a part of the program. Yeah, you're in it. You're associated. You're affiliated by just hanging out this long. But yeah, thumbs up or a 5-star review, share it, subscribe. I'm also sharing it to the Substack and figuring all that out because I do believe that while creative people have to be in a lot of different places, that they should also own that conversation with their audience, and Substack allows that. And I'm trying to get better at having that direct conversation. So if you're not a podcast person, it's also going up on the Substack if you want to follow me on that. But until next time, I'll see you around.